Matt Castelli is going up against incumbent Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who, after hosting a rally in Saranac Lake this past weekend, came to her Plattsburgh campaign headquarters to sit down with us. Thank you. Appreciate you joining us. You're running for a 5th term. Why should voters here in the 21st District re-elect you?
Well, I'm running on my record of results, delivering for hardworking families, for North Country seniors, for veterans, and just the work that I've done over the past 4 terms. Whether it's delivering over $5 million of VA benefits, whether it's the Northern Border Regional Commission grants that have gone to local programs to attract doctors to rural parts of New York State, or whether it's my advocacy on northern border issues, successfully advocating over many months to reopen the northern border and lifting of mandates like most recently the Arrive Can app. And I also have a strong record of keeping my promises to this district. I have a very strong record when it comes to standing up for the Constitution. I have a very strong record when it comes to standing up for our military and all the work that I've done in support of Fort Drum and getting the National Defense Bill signed into law every single year since I've been in office. And I also think what I hear from my constituents is people are struggling under single-party Democrat leadership in both Washington and Albany. Inflation is at a historic high. Home heating bills are on pace to be the highest that they've been in well over a decade. And there's a crime crisis in New York State. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, and I'm running not only on my record of results, but strong leadership to deal with those issues.
And you talk about the work ahead of you. What is the biggest issue that you think you'll be facing in the next 2 years that for the folks right here locally in the 21st District?
By far the biggest issue, and this is what I hear from voters every single day, is inflation. And we're dealing with an inflation rate that's never been this high since I've been alive, highest in my lifetime. So for a whole generation of families, they are really struggling to make ends meet. For seniors who were close to or planning for retirement, they're seeing their retirements being just completely washed away because of our weak economy right now. I believe, and voters understand, that this historic and painful inflation is a result of single-party Democrat rule in Washington. $9 trillion of taxpayer dollars that have been spent since Joe Biden took office that has fueled this inflation crisis. On top of that, but very much tied to inflation as part of the broader economic issues, are energy prices. And that particularly hurts our region because we're very rural. And energy costs have been significantly high. Gas prices have increased, diesel has skyrocketed, and home heating bills are on pace to be very, very expensive this winter.
What do you say to the critics who say you've gone from being very moderate here in the district to ultra magna, that you've become much more partisan?
Well, I'm proud of my record standing up for the values of this district, and I believe, Tom, that today's Democrat Party has shifted so far to the left, out of touch with our upstate values, whether it's their calls to defund the police, whether it's their doubling down on anti-Second Amendment legislation that we've seen from Albany Democrats in response to the Supreme Court's correct ruling against the unconstitutional concealed carry limits in New York State. And I've kept my promises when I first ran, but the reality is I still know how to get things done. I still am in the top 25% most bipartisan members of Congress. And you can look at my legislative record on the Armed Services Committee, for example, the fact that I'm a leader on that committee and we get that bill passed every single year, or the role that I've played as co-chair of the Northern Border Caucus, which is bipartisan, whether that's meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau and highlighting concerns of North Country businesses, or my outreach to our Canadian partners or the Canadian ambassador to the U.S. to raise the concerns, not only from my district, but frankly, from the American people.
How has your advancement in the House and being elected conference chair by your fellow Republicans benefited your constituents here in the 21st?
It's overwhelmingly benefited my constituents because it gives our issues and concerns a seat at the highest level, and I'm never going to apologize for that. This district deserves someone who is a strong advocate and has that seat at the highest level to raise our concerns. We need much more than a backbencher when it comes to this district, and I'm proud to put this district on the national stage. People know where the North Country stands. They know our values, and part of that is due to the fact that I've had the opportunity to serve in Republican leadership, and that's only going to be more impactful and more able to deliver results when we're in a Republican majority, which we're only 5 seats away from earning.
You talk about that. What are some of the things that will happen if you and the Republicans do win back control of the House? What are some of the immediate priorities?
That's a really important question. So people know that we're facing an inflation crisis, an energy crisis, border crisis, crime crisis as a result of single-party rule. Republicans believe it's important to put forth our agenda, which is why we unveiled our commitment to America with 4 major themes, focusing on an economy that's strong, so reining in the reckless spending to rein in the rate of inflation, making sure that we have a strong domestic supply chain so that we're not reliant upon China. Number 2, a nation that's safe. Supporting safety and security in our communities, that means supporting our law enforcement, immediately making available federal grants for our county sheriffs, for local police departments, for school resource officers, and securing the southern border is an important part of that safety and security, and that impacts us specifically in this district because of the Border Patrol officers and CBP officers who have been transferred over and over again to the southern border. Number 3 is a future that's based upon freedom. That means standing up for the Second Amendment. It also means standing up for issues like parents' role when it comes to their kids' education. So we will pass a Parents' Bill of Rights in the first 100 days. And then lastly, but importantly, is a government that's accountable. We need to hold the Biden administration accountable for their failures, but also make sure that the United States Capitol is open to the American people, returning the will of the people because it's the people's house. And Speaker Pelosi has not run Congress and not run the Capitol in an open manner for just citizens from across the country to participate in their government.
And let me ask you about the Capitol in just a moment, but as far as the agenda, do you plan to launch investigations into the FBI, into the Justice Department, especially after the raid on Mar-a-Lago?
Yes, we do plan to launch a number of investigations. One on the unsecure border. There needs to be significant oversight on the abject failure of this administration, specifically Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden on securing the border. Part of that is also investigations into the illegal flights of illegals into New York State and other parts of the country in the dark of night without any coordination with local law enforcement. In addition, we will be doing oversight of the FBI and the Department of Justice because people are deeply concerned about the politicization. The fact that there's this sense that there are 2 sets of rules. If you're a Democrat, you're not held accountable. If you're a Republican and the likely opponent of Joe Biden, you're targeted by these agencies. And then there's a real local important issue of investigations and accountability that I plan on leading the charge and already have, and that's the deadly limo crash in Schoharie County. Many of those families have yet to receive any answers from the FBI. The FBI, of course, was the owner of the limo company was a longtime FBI informant, and it took me asking Director Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, about that in order for the FBI to launch an investigation. The FBI has refused to provide that to Congress or to those families impacted. I'm going to demand transparency, and it's going to take an investigation and subpoenas to do it. I will not hesitate to deliver that transparency to constituents.
And are there concerns that the limo owner may have received special treatment from the FBI?
Well, there's 2 separate issues. So there's obviously the case that's going on right now, and the plea deal was not accepted by the judge. That was thrown out. My issue is the FBI, if they knew, which they did, I believe, of all these run-ins with the law, all these failure to abide by any of the DOT rules and regulations, the FBI, when you have a longtime informant, that informant is not supposed to break the law. That informant is not supposed to have any type of run-ins with illegal activity. For the FBI to turn a blind eye on that over many, many years, and then, of course, we now know the owner of the limo company had many, many run-ins with the law, many run-ins with New York State DOT. The FBI should have stepped in and should have never allowed that individual to stay in business. And they need to be held accountable. They're trying to brush this under the rug, but people deserve justice, accountability, and transparency.
And of course, those 4 sisters grew up here in Chazy Lake, the 4 King sisters.
Yes.
Will you push to launch impeachment proceedings against Joe Biden?
That's a decision for all of the House Republicans to make. That's not a decision for me as an individual, and impeachment is a very high bar. I'm very concerned about what I believe is corruption within the Biden family, and you need to have a thoughtful investigation before you jump to impeachment. I have experienced 2 impeachments since I've been in Congress, both of Democrats illegally targeting President Trump, and it's been a very political weapon. But you need to have investigations before you make that next jump. That's what Democrats failed to do on both the first and second unconstitutional and illegal impeachment of President Trump. But I laid out what our top focuses are, which again, the economy, security, freedom, and a government that's accountable.
And speaking of Mr. Trump, do you think he'll run again for president, and do you want him to? Is he your top choice?
I do think he's going to run again. You know, I talk to President a couple times every single week, and he pays very closely attention to all these congressional districts across the country, but he knows New York State very well, and he knows county by county this district very well, and is very familiar since he is a New Yorker at heart. I do think he's going to run again. I think he'll announce sooner than people realize, and I think he'll win, and I strongly support him.
There's been a lot of speculation. What if he asks you to be his VP? Will you?
I would be honored to serve in the Trump administration. I have an election before me right now, though, and I'm working hard to serve as the voice and the Congresswoman for New York's 21st Congressional District and as the House Republican Conference Chair in the next Congress. And we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I certainly would be honored to serve in a Trump administration.
Now, Mr. Trump insists that he legitimately won the 2020 presidential election, that there was a massive conspiracy, widespread voter fraud, and that the election was stolen from him. Do you agree with that assessment?
I agree that there were election irregularities and unconstitutional overreach of unelected bureaucrats who were rewriting election law in certain states. And I stand by my objection specifically to the state of Pennsylvania in terms of you had unelected individuals unilaterally changing election rules. Those rules have to go through state legislatures. If you remember, going back to 2020, Governor Cuomo tried to unilaterally rewrite election law, and there was major pushback to him because we believe that would have been illegal. And of course, he chose not to do that. So we need to strengthen our elections in states across the country. We need to strengthen our election security in New York State. And certainly before the next presidential election, we need to make sure that we rebuild faith in our elections. And part of that is having voter ID, chain of custody for absentee ballots, signature verification, and also a legal ballot counting process. New York State, for example, we didn't have a seated member of Congress for 3 months from the Mohawk Valley because they were discovering absentees in drawers with Post-it notes, and it went on and on. It was a real blemish on our election laws in New York State. So there's a lot of work that we need to do, and I think people are always going to have questions about the 2020 election. Joe Biden is President of the United States. We're experiencing the results of failed policies in his failed presidency, but we need to fix our election systems to make sure they're stronger and people have faith in them.
And back to the election for a moment, just hours after the attack on the Capitol. Why did you vote against certifying the 2020 presidential election for the state of Pennsylvania, the results from Pennsylvania?
Mike, I stand by my House floor statement, which is I oppose unconstitutional overreach of unelected bureaucrats who are rewriting election law. Any changes that are made in any state should go through the state legislatures. And in the case of Pennsylvania and other certain states, it did not go through state legislatures. So you can't have individuals just unilaterally changing the rules when we're in the middle of the Super Bowl game, for example, of the presidential election. That is unconstitutional, and it's not the first time in modern history that individuals have stood up and opposed certain electors and certification. Democrats have opposed every single Republican president since Ronald Reagan, Tom, based upon the electoral count and also uncertainties.
If the Republicans win back the House, will the January 6th committee's work and investigation come to an end?
Well, the January 6th committee is Nancy Pelosi's committee. It includes no members that are appointed by Republican leadership, and that's the first time in the history of the Congress where you are not allowed as a minority party to appoint members to a committee. So it is an illegal committee according to the rules of the House. That committee will not exist in a Republican majority, but what will is making sure that we improve the safety and security of the Capitol and provide support to our Capitol police officers. What's often not focused on in the media, but really, really important, is our Capitol police officers had not received the proper training. They had outdated equipment, and there was not intelligence sharing between various agencies. I'm also very concerned that leading up to January 6th, the Sergeant at Arms, who is an appointment by Speaker Pelosi, decided not to accept the National Guard offered by President Trump due to optics. There's a lot of work that House Republicans intend to do to secure the Capitol and make sure the Capitol Police have the support that they need.
You don't believe the hearings the January 6th committee hearings have brought out any evidence that raises legitimate questions whether Mr. Trump or anyone in his administration helped organize or prompt the participants in the rampage that day to do what they did?
Well, I've been very clear. I have condemned the violence and destruction that occurred inside the Capitol. People have a constitutional right to peacefully protest, but the important word there is peacefully, and those that committed crimes and committed violence or damage should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But the fact that Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office is the only office that's off limits, stated by the Democrat chair, Benny Thompson, of this committee, that stinks to high heaven. And the fact that she refused the National Guard in the days leading up to it due to optics, that's of deep concern to me. It's also of concern to me that she has responsibility over the board of individuals that makes determinations over the security posture of the U.S. Capitol. Clearly she did not do her job as Speaker of the House to make sure that the Capitol Police had the resources, the support, and the intelligence sharing that they needed.
Do you believe what happened that day was an insurrection?
I believe what happened that day they were individual rioters, and again, I've condemned the violence and destruction. I would not use that term.
Thank you, as always, for taking the time to talk with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.